the National Family Health Survey round 5, which was published most recently and has been in the news, it shows that there is 35% children are stunted, and it shows that 19% were found to be wasted. Now, with these figures, 35% stunting, 19% wasting, in our own survey, in our own Government of India surveys, I think the question is not that is there a methodological issue? Are we ranked wrongly below Bangladesh and Pakistan? I think the larger issue is that what are we doing as a country and what should we be doing to address these figures? So it's not just the Global Hunger Index, it's the government's own figures. Now let me point you to yet another third metric which points out the problems today. So, we have the consumer expenditure survey that actually shows us that how much our households consuming. Unfortunately, the latest round of 17-18, the government did not publish it, saying that, oh, there are some methodological issues. Now, one would expect that fine, if there are issues, you quickly revise it and redo a survey, because these are very crucial surveys. Once the government in fact has not even published or tried to revise or do it again. So in fact, the only thing that then we have to rely on are surveys led by civil society. The Right to Food campaign, of which I am a part, undertook the hunger surveys, and we've done 2 rounds now. The latest round we completed just earlier this year. It is showing that 41% of the families who we interviewed said that both in terms of quantity and in terms of quality, they are much worse off than what they were in the pre-COVID period. Now, these are actual interviews where we're going and talking to people, and the kind of questions that we are asking is that, okay, in the last 30 days, which means the last 1 month, how many times have you had green leafy vegetables? How many times have you had dal? How many times have you had any source of meat protein if you're a meat eater? And sometimes what happens is that in these stories, in these statistics rather, the real stories get lost. So let me just tell you what the status is on the ground, because in fact I was involved myself in carrying out some of these surveys in Delhi, and we work extensively in slum settlements in Delhi. People who we spoke to, and when we asked them that when was the last time that you had green leafy vegetables, one of the women who I was interviewing started sort of smiling in a very sad sort of a way, and said that I had it twice, and both times it was not even in my own house. It was in the house where I was working as a domestic help, where when they cooked palak, which is spinach, they said that, why don't you also eat something? She said, I'm in no position to afford any green leafy vegetable. And the reason, of course, being that livelihoods were devastated during the lockdown. And post the lockdowns, the economic recovery has not happened for most people. So, for example, if a woman was working in 3 houses earlier, able to earn, say, 5,000 per house, which is about 15,000, and her husband was doing some other job, today that woman is struggling to even keep one house where she's going on working. People are going on saying, no, we don't want people who are going to too many houses, because there's still some kind of fear of infection, some fear of, there's today also viral infection that's spreading in places like Delhi. So with this kind of income shock and people not having the resilience, basically not having savings to rely on, families went from earning 20,000, 25,000 to earning zero during lockdown, building up a huge debt, and today maybe earning 50% of what they were earning pre-COVID. And if you, on the other hand, look at food inflation, so mustard oil, which is the staple cooking oil for people from the lower socioeconomic strata, the cost of mustard oil till recently was double of what it was last year. So it was 200 rupees. So when we asked people in the survey that when was the last time you had oil, many of them said we cannot afford oil today, and therefore we are preparing our masalas in water. After making something, we're just putting some water to cook that masala. When we asked people about dal, one of the women said that, yeah, dal I end up having 3-4 times a week. I like to try and feed it to the children. And just out of curiosity, I asked her, I said, well, tell me the recipe, which dal do your children like? And she said that it's just a handful of the dal. The rest of it is just water. She said, I make one small packet of dal last for a very, very long time. I just want to say that It's not about, are we doing poorly than our neighbor, are we doing better than our neighbor, because I think hunger is an issue that the government really needs to take with the kind of seriousness that it requires, not make it about fighting over methodological issues. And let me just say this also, that a lot of what the government has criticized is perhaps not even correct about the methodology of the global hunger index. So we in fact had a detailed press conference where some of the experts explained, like one of the things that the government is saying, that, oh, it's purely based on some kind of a telephone survey of 3,000 people. That's factually not correct. I mean, one could argue the point that given the fact that most of the parameters in the global hunger index relate to children, perhaps it should be called a children's health outcome kind of a survey or health index. Because ultimately when you're looking at child malnutrition, it's not just about the quantity of food, it's also about the quality of food, it's also about access to basic health care. So ultimately what we are ending up with is children who will have poor cognitive and poor physical development, which in the long run will of course impact their own life, but also the economic output, the labor force participation, all of these other macro factors as well. See, it's not just about the calorie intake and saying that, okay, I'm just keeping you alive. I think the rations that we are giving, I think the better way to define it is that it's keeping people above the starvation line, because the diet is still very, very poor. And that's exactly what I was saying, that if you look at intake of green leafy vegetables, you look at intake of protein, you look at intake of edible oil, and protein, especially in children, it's very, very poor. It's become so expensive. Just an egg, which say pre-COVID was costing maybe 3-4 rupees in a place like Delhi, today you cannot buy even one egg for less than 8 to 10 rupees. So that's doubling of basic food items. And there are two issues related to rations that I would like to highlight. The first is the coverage and the number of people who are getting rations. So under the National Food Security Act, the ration schemes operates under the National Food Security Act. Under that, it's written that up to 75% of people in rural areas and up to 50% people in urban areas are entitled to get rations. So based on the 2011 census, approximately 67% of the population of the 2011 census were issued ration cards, which is about 80 crore people across the country. Since 2011, our population has gone up. And therefore, if the 2021 census had happened, we would have found that at the same percentage of coverage, that is 67%, the number of people who should have gotten ration cards would have increased. And it would not have increased by a small number. The increase would be anywhere between 10 to 12 crores. Now, the government is saying that we are not able to do a census because there is COVID. Whereas if you look at it, most other activities have resumed 100% in offline mode as well. So the government is going on saying we are unable to do the census. In fact, in a Supreme Court hearing, they've given on affidavit that the census is indefinitely delayed. So they've said that the census is indefinitely delayed, and even the date of notifying the census today cannot be disclosed. Now, in such a scenario, even the Supreme Court said that, but you cannot deny people rations. You cannot deny 10, 12 crore people rations because you're not doing the census. Why don't you use your population estimates? There are these population projections, and these are by the government themselves. These are not some civil society or some hunger index or something else. These are by Government of India, the population projections. And the Supreme Court said, look, why don't you use the population projections and on that basis increase the food coverage? Unfortunately, even though it's been more than 1 year since the judgment of the Supreme Court, we find that till today, the Government of India has not increased coverage. So straight away, 10 to 12 crore people who should have had ration cards today do not have ration cards. The other issue is, of course, of what we just discussed, the food basket itself, that it's only cereal based. There is no protein. This dal was given for just 3 months during the period of COVID. Now, the pandemic and the economic distress, it's now going to be nearly 36 months of economic distress in another, by March, we'll hit 3 years of COVID in the country and the first lockdown. But if we find that just giving 3 months of dal, not giving any other edible oil, not giving any green leafy vegetables, not giving bananas, not giving eggs, milk, wherever people have these dietary preferences, not giving local millets. Again, local diets is something that people are used to. Children are used to eating, whatever is locally grown. So that's been a big issue. And let me just state that it's not as if the government is not aware of the distress. If you see that under ration scheme, people are entitled to get 5 kilograms of ration per person for every family that's listed on the ration card. Since the pandemic, the government has doubled this, and under the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, they've been giving 5 kilos extra food grain. But the problem has been that they've only been giving this to the ration card holders only, not to anybody who does not have a ration card. And every time that they've extended the scheme, and the most recent extension has happened in September, it's written in the government press release that we are extending this because we realize that people continue to be in distress and we do not want anybody to go hungry. Now, in such a scenario where you yourself are acknowledging that people are in distress, that people need extra rations, I don't understand the need to sort of just discount and divert attention from things like the Global Hunger Index. Yes, they may not be perfect, but they're pointing to something. And secondly, there's no reason as to why government is not expanding the food net to include those 10 12 crore extra people. And in fact, what we've been saying is that looking at the level of distress, you should in fact make it an on-demand scheme, which basically means that make it universal. Anybody who needs ration should be able to come and take ration from you. Just exclude income tax payee and maybe people who own some properties or something. Otherwise, give ration at large. We are facing an unprecedented situation where family incomes have got really hit. Livelihoods are really impacted. Real wages are down. Employment rates have not come back to pre-COVID era. So there's really no reason to not expand food security. Ultimately, ensuring better health outcomes for people at large also results in better economic outcomes for the country. The government has made it mandatory first to link the Aadhaar card of every single person in the family to the ration card. So if suppose there are 5 people in your family, but the Aadhaar of only 3 people is linked, then only those 3 people will get rations. And very often this Aadhaar linkage doesn't happen due to either technological issues or even due to real world issues, which is that, say, your name is Bhaswati. Now somebody might spell it as Baswati. So maybe it got spelled as Baswati on your Aadhaar, but it got spelled as Bhaswati on your ration card. Now, when you're trying to link the two, they'll not get linked because it'll keep showing some error. Correcting any of these documents is very difficult. It's full of bureaucratic hurdles. And unfortunately, it's something that most common people are just not able to navigate. So one thing that we found is that saying that every person has to have their Aadhaar linked to the ration card has created problems. The other issue is that for every person who wants to go and take ration, the biometric must match. So it doesn't matter that the ration shopkeeper knows me, the whole community knows me, everyone says, yeah, this is Amrita, she has a ration card. If my biometric doesn't match, and which could happen due to many issues, it could happen due to physical labor, creating some, changes to my fingerprints. It could happen due to electricity not being available, the POS machine not being charged, due to network coverage. I mean, so many times we all have to run to our terraces to receive an important call because there's some network disruption. Any of these issues will actually result in the family being denied rations. And we've seen, how this really affects the poorest of the poor. Unfortunately, the government just doesn't seem to be taking cognizance of some of these things. Like recently, they came out with this bizarre thing saying that if anybody doesn't take rations for 3 months, and we'll determine this on the basis of biometric, we'll assume that they're not interested in ration. Now, there could be many reasons. Maybe I'm bedridden and I'm unable to get up and reach the ration shop, or maybe I'm reaching there every single month and I'm trying to authenticate myself and it's just not happening. Unfortunately, we have made experimenting with technology and into the most basic lifeline services of the country. I mean, sure, you want to experiment and see that, okay, if we do this at scale, will it work? maybe do it for something else. Do it where it's not a critical service like ration. Think of doing it in other places, test it somewhere else. And most importantly, fine, you want to introduce technology, that's great, because even I'm a big votary of using technology to help deliver services to people. But then the moment there are issues with the technology, have safeguards in place, right? So you say that, okay, if the biometric doesn't work, doesn't matter. It's not that we'll cancel your ration card. Just we'll give you ration, we'll make a note of it and then try and resolve it. But over here, everything is put on the citizen that, oh, if your name is not spelled correctly, now you go running around. If you've lost your Aadhaar card or your Aadhaar number, now you go running around. And these are impossible hurdles for a common person to actually try and cross. And unfortunately, the government just keeps, tom-tomming the number of people who are not able to get ration as some kind of ghost beneficiaries. And very often this is not even true. So, for example, a few years ago in Delhi, when they made this biometric thing mandatory, up to 25% of ration card holders could not get rations. And when there was an attempt to try and cancel all those ration cards, people came out in large numbers and said that, look, we are living here, we live here, we're not able to access rations because of the technology, and you cannot cancel our ration cards. And the government actually had to take back its decisions. So, with lifelines, and especially at times like these unprecedented crises, don't experiment with lifelines. I mean, do this experiment elsewhere, try and see if it works. Make it mandatory for other things. Don't make it mandatory at a place, and especially where you're dealing with the population that does physical labor, where some of this is bound to happen. And if you still insist on having such things, then have foolproof safeguards. Supreme Court last year in June told the government that, look, 10 to 12 crore people are being left out because you've not done the census. Now, that's alarming in itself, that we are not doing basic surveys like census, like consumer expenditure survey and all. On the other hand, when Supreme Court is saying that, look, it's not people's fault that you're not doing the census, use your population projection. Why is the government not doing it? It's beyond me. I cannot understand why the government is not doing it. You've been told by the highest court in the country to do something. And it's not something where something could be, oh, this is ideologically against what, say, the party in power stands. So this is basic survival of people. Why would you not do it? I think it really becomes a question of political will and priorities. Unfortunately, even with PMGKAY, although it's really helped people with ration cards survive this tough time, the way it's been rolled out, it's actually very, very problematic and objectionable. They will not announce whether or not it's extended unless there is some election in place. So, for example, on September 30th, the PMGKY was supposed to come to an end because they've only been announcing it in 3-month extension. Till the 30th of September, people were feeling anxiety that I don't know if next month I'm going to get this additional ration or not. And if I don't get it, how will I manage? Then in October, the Prime Minister makes an announcement that, oh, because it's festival season, I don't want my brothers and sisters to go hungry. When you're running social policies at this scale, we have to understand there are anxieties in people. Will this continue? Will this not continue? And you have to deliver it in a much more dignified way. This kind of thing of saying that I will not tell you now, we know that it's extended till December. By November, they should clarify that will you extend it beyond December or will you not? But we won't see that. We'll see sometime in January. And unfortunately, a lot of commentators have also pointed out that perhaps they are linking these extensions to elections in assemblies. So that's very unfortunate that it's being sort of politicized in this manner. Let me just put forth 3 demands. First demand is increase the coverage of the public distribution system, increase the number of people in it. At the very least, increase it to include the 10 to 12 crore people who would have got included if you had done a 2021 survey. But actually what we need is going beyond that. That is, that make it a on-demand system, make it a universal system where you only exclude a certain percentage of people, saying that, okay, if your income tax is SCs or something. The reason being that the moment you try to target a scheme, what happens is that then you start saying, okay, show me proof of your income, okay, show me, that you're poor. And it's actually the poorest and the most marginalized who are not able to furnish the necessary documentation. Like a homeless person, if you look at Delhi, and I'm saying this with a lot of sense of responsibility because I know that these are things that have an impact, and this is something that we studied on our own. In Delhi, 95% of the homeless population does not have a ration card. The reason being that the kind of documentation that you're supposed to give a residence proof, you're supposed to give income proof, you're supposed to be able to show identity proof. Most people do not have these kind of documents who are homeless. So what is happening is at the moment, instead of giving it to everyone with excluding only a few, we are putting the onus on people to prove how they're eligible for a scheme. It creates a whole host of problems. Let me point out another big category of people who face a lot of issues regarding this. So the ration card application in Delhi says that you must include a photocopy of your electricity bill, and that should be of a capacity of less than 2 kilowatt. Now, most people, most migrant workers who come to Delhi, or people who do not have enough funds to buy even a small room in a juggi, actually live on rent. So they're tenants in urban poor settlements. These tenants are unable to furnish the electricity bill because the landlord is very hesitant to give them any kind of electricity or water bill, for the fear that if the slum were to be demolished, then the person who holds that electricity bill or water bill will be able to claim some kind of rights and claim rehabilitation on the basis of that. So again, a large percentage of people, and remember that these are the poorest, these are people who can't even afford a 10 by 10 room in a slum. They're living on rent. There, most of them are migrant worker families, and we know how the migrant workers are the worst impacted. They are not able to get a ration card because they're not able to furnish an electricity bill. Now, this is what happens when instead of a universal system, you say, you prove to me you're poor and only then I'll give you ration. And the second important thing is the food basket. We have to have edible oil, protein, we have to have green leafy vegetables, local grains. And I think the third issue, because the Global Hunger Index also actually relates mostly to children's health outcomes and food intakes, I think there needs to be a serious boost to the midday meal scheme. I think the government has been thinking of it, but I think it's time to have actually two meals, breakfast and lunch, being provided. In our surveys and even in our work in the Basti, the midday meal is often the only decent meal that children are eating. So it really needs to be improved. It cannot just be some basic sort of dal chawal, rajma chawal kind of food. We have to have protein, we have to have fruits, we have to have milk. Wherever children are okay to eat eggs, we have to give them eggs.